Misha has to say about how we empower humans through the use of AI and maybe avoid some of the dangers along the way. But anyway, focusing on empowerment is good. Misha Sra is the John and the Eileen Gerngross Assistant Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where she directs the Human AI Experience Lab in the Computer Science Department. And she received her PhD from the MIT Media Lab in 2018, advised by Professor Pattie Maes in the Fluid Interfaces Group. And she has published at the most selective HCI, so human-computer interaction and VR, virtual reality, and machine learning venues, and where she has received 4 Best Paper Awards and honorable mentions. MIT selected her as an EECS Rising Star in 2018. In 2023, she was awarded an NSF CAREER Award for her work in human AI interaction design. And her research has received extensive coverage from leading media outlets and has drawn interest of the industry, such as Toyota Research, Samsung Research, and Snap. And before Misha came here, we were at Shonan meeting in Kanagawa Prefecture, and Shun was also there. And that was a very exciting meeting on the intersection of neuroscience, human-computer interaction, a little bit of AI, some virtual reality. And that was a very stimulating event. And yeah, so I look forward to what Misha is going to present to us today. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Tom. And I agree, last week at the Shonan meeting was pretty fun. All right, so I'm really excited to be here. First time in Okinawa, first time at OIST, really cool place. And as Tom said, my area of research is human-computer interaction, or HCI. At my lab, at the Human AI Experience Lab, we design, build, and study new types of human AI systems that can enhance our daily activities and hopefully augment our abilities. Now, of course, building tools is not anything new. Building tools to enhance our abilities is something that we've been doing as a species for the last 3.3 million years. Stone tools, way back then, gave us the ability, gave our ancestors, I should say, greater physical abilities. And then fire, mastery of fire, transformed our brains. The invention of writing about 5,000 years ago gave us the ability to store and transmit knowledge widely. And then the digital revolution of the last century dramatically expanded our ability to process information and connect globally. And with AI now, we certainly are at a point where we have the potential to do so much more. The question is, will we be able to get there? Traditional tools, in my opinion, whether it is a hammer or a laptop or anything else that we currently have, I think of them as command executors. We ask it to do something, it does what we ask it to do. So it's mostly just acting upon our input and then coming out with what it's programmed to do. And in contrast, I think of AI. And when I'm saying AI, currently for my talk today, I'm mostly talking about LLMs and the more recent AI systems. I think of AI as more of a dynamic self-improving system. We can still direct its goals if we're talking about agency, which we did a lot last week. But it can also learn from our interactions. It can tune itself to our context and can take initiative instead of just waiting for us to give it instructions. And it is that ability, I think, that gives it the potential to perhaps take on tasks such as social roles, whether it could be an instructor or a coach or a mentor or anything else of that nature. But despite this potential, our interactions for engaging with AI are kind of very command-centric. They're rather limited. It's what I would call the interfaces of flattened chat. This is what the dominant interfaces look like. We can talk to them, of course, right? We have mobile apps, but fundamentally, this is what we're doing. It's all very text-centric. But what if instead of doing this, we could do this? What if we could embed AI directly into our environments that can extend its impact beyond the computer tasks, beyond the knowledge work that it's already supporting? And that way, I believe that it could help us unlock new types of solutions for people who are always on the go, always on the move, and for kinds of problems that only happen out and about when you're in the real world. So here are some examples of the kinds of tasks I'm thinking or imagining, right? Today's AI, as I just said, remains confined to flat 2D screens, but the world we live in is 3D. It's dynamic, and it's not just set up as a question answering system. Our interactions with the world are not just that. So for AI to serve as a true partner, whether, in many scenarios, we can see either being a coach or an instructor, or a therapist assistant, or a mental health coach, or even a mediator for conflict management, teacher, and let's say surgical training, or creative pursuits like dance and choreography, right? All of these, AI, I believe, needs to meet us where we are doing these tasks out in the real world, right? So all of these examples represent some form of continuous dynamic motion where the scenarios are different from conventional screen-based assistance. So you can imagine doing any of these tasks and then stopping and then going to ChatGPT and asking for help and then coming back. It totally breaks your flow of how you're engaging with the system. But we can do better than that. We can actually have ChatGPT come out, or any other LLM for that matter, and even visualize it. If we put on AR headsets, visualize it the way we want to see it, whether as a humanoid or an alien or whatever other visualization we want for it. An embodiment, a virtual embodiment, I should say, for it. And that way, the AI, the guidance will get anchored more to the real world, what we need to be. Our hands will be free, our attention will be on the task, and less so on doing this. Now, I think the interfaces for AI are the way they are because they are designed around algorithms, not around people. The current approach is sort of to build and meet some mathematical objectives with minimal input from end users. And not to say that's not needed. Of course, we need better models, right? But in terms of building applications also, that still be the dominant mechanism. And what it should be, I believe, is this, where our approach is considering the user as the center around which an iterative design process unfolds. And so I think if we do this, then people don't have to accept sort of brittle interfaces that can do so much, but not quite fit into their workflows and their lives. And actually, mechanisms like this can help us answer or create tools that are solving problems that people really need solving. So when AI can truly align with our needs, I believe it can foster growth, it can safeguard autonomy, and it can enhance resilience. And in the rest of the talk, I'm going to present some projects that we've done at our lab that sort of fall into these three large areas. All right, so let me begin with the first area, which is growth, and projects are focused on supporting learning and continuous development. This work emerged from our own experience of learning and teaching during the pandemic. And we started looking into how might a personalized AI system motivate learning and curiosity. Well, how could it enhance learning effectiveness and people's well-being, right? And how can we use this new technology for positive applications? And at the time, and even so now, right, the term deepfake was coined and a lot of stuff was happening online every day. You hear about some misuse of this technology. Now, to be able to answer the questions we wanted to, we had to first build a system. And so we developed a pipeline which can create personalized pedagogical agents, which would be the output, so a talking head video. And the input, we wanted to keep it as multimodal as possible, so the pipeline is accessible to all kinds of instructors all over the world. And so we have video, we have audio, we even have text as input, and ultimately you get what you want. We did also propose this idea of labeling everything with something that's traceable to indicate that it's AI generated, which I think has now become also an area in itself, that we need to tell people that this is not a recorded video, it's a generated video. And so by generating all sorts of characters, we were asking the question of how might we create these characters that can enhance learning motivation? I mean, clearly, hardly anybody was motivated to sit in front of their laptop on Zoom, all alone in their home or wherever they were staying during the pandemic, and actually go to classes. And of course, generating all sorts of characters gives us the ability to generate any kind of characters, historical or fictional or real, and it depends on who you want to learn from. So following that pipeline, we did another project where we actually did a study now using that pipeline to see that if we let people learn from characters that they want to learn from, what kind of impact does it have on their motivation? And so this is sort of what a study design looked like. We had 134 participants, and it was a study done online. We had the experimental character, and then we had a control character, which sort of looked like the experimental character, but not exactly, not recognizably so. And they're both generated. The independent variables in the study were the degree of liking and the degree of admiration, which participants had for that character. And then we had several dependent variables. We're looking at learning performance, we're looking at emotions, motivations, learning effectiveness, and all sorts of things. So in terms of learning performance, this was a one-time study. It was about a 15-minute lesson based on the World Health Organization's information on vaccines. Nothing very complex. At the time, I guess, also of interest to a lot of people. And so we didn't really see any learning performance difference in quiz scores. Part of it could also be explained by the novelty of the whole thing. Everybody's paying more attention than they might usually pay to something that they're trying to learn. So I can imagine maybe a longitudinal study might give us different results in this regard. In terms of motivation, even if we told people they were learning from a virtual character, the effect of liking or admiring the character translated into positive impact. As we can see, for things like, I was motivated to pay more attention to the lesson, I would like more lessons like this one, and I'd like to get more advanced material from this instructor. We saw significant improvements, a positive change in that. In terms of emotions, the emotional engagement also showed an increase into things like the instructor making the participants feel happy, feel content. The instructor did not make them feel frustrated or bored. And then for the third research question, we leveraged the use of what's called the agent persona instrument to measure the learner's perception of the pedagogical agent that is actually trying to teach them something. And so prior work has consolidated measures from this questionnaire into 4 categories of how well can they facilitate learning, how credible they are, what is their human likeness, and how engaging they are. And again, as we can see, we see significant difference in both those versus the control, in both the liking and admiring conditions versus the control. And there's several other results in the paper itself. I'm sort of trying to do a broad overview of my area of my research here. So in general, I think the results are promising, but many things to caution against, right? As with anything AI or with any technology, we have to be mindful of our use of technology. It's so easy to misportray and add disinformation with this technology. We could generate Einstein saying whatever we wanted to say. But then the question is, who owns Einstein's image or likeness? Can we even use it to say things? What kind of, is it a copyright violation? What kind of violation is it when we use Einstein, who's no longer here to give us permission to use his likeness for teaching physics or relativity for that matter? Right? So privacy and consent, of course, are important. Like, how do we get consent from diseased persons who we may want to use? And then we also don't want to replace anybody, any human users. We want to supplement it, right? This was designed for a very specific use case of enhancing motivation during the pandemic. This may or may not work now because we're out of the pandemic. Everybody's going to classroom learning and things like that. But it could potentially supplement online learning where motivation sort of drops when people start learning online after a little bit. So that work kind of got us thinking about how can we use this tool to learn from the past and learn from people who actually created that past, or what we think of as past, but in a more interactive manner. And so that led us to the project Living Memories, which is how we can interactively sort of cherish the memories of people long gone and learn from their wisdom and ways. So again, we sort of have to develop our pipeline. We built our pipeline. The top part of the pipeline is the same as the previous one because we're generating a talking head video. The bottom part of the pipeline is more an LLM-based pipeline. And so the idea was, architecturally, what we want to do was, this is GPT-3 we're using. We wanted to constrain the model from hallucinating because we are trying to get the perspective of a specific individual. We don't want GPT to go all over the place. And so we had a combination of two models, the semantic model, which actually looks for similarity in the person's original text data. That's all we use. And then a GPT model, which converts it into more conversational, but we make sure that anything that comes out of GPT is checked against the semantic model. So in a sense, we were doing RAG at the time without knowing we were doing RAG, which now is pretty popular.
Sorry, what's RAG?
Oh, retrieval augmentation generation, or augmented generation. You're basically checking against some ground truths to make sure that whatever is coming out of an LLM is not pure hallucination. All right, so here is sort of what Leonardo's character is doing, and our basis of, if we ask Leonardo a question about how should figures be depicted in a painting, the ground truth is coming from Leonardo's original writing journals. A fine-tuned GPT-3 comes up with its own answer. Our mechanism of using an LLM with a semantic model comes up with an answer also. But this answer is less made up, is more closer to what's in the journals than the answer that's made up by the GPT-3. And similarly, for a question that Leonardo technically should have no information about, but an LLM does, we're answering, I'm not sure, but GPT-3 is answering whatever it interprets the United Nations to mean. All right, so what we want to do, of course, after we build everything is to evaluate how well we're doing. And so we built first a 600 question answer data set, and we used that. Had 86 people evaluate the answers that were generated out of each of these models. And then they rated those answers on those four metrics: content preservation, style preservation, understandability, and grammar. And for each of these metrics, our model, which is the semantic model and an LLM, did better than the other models. Those metrics were also something that we came up in an earlier paper that we did on expert layman text style transfer. So that's sort of the model side of the evaluation. Then we did a user evaluation. And then in this study, we had people read about DaVinci, we had them interact with the living memory that we created, and we had them do both. And it turns out that when you do both is when you have the most benefits for curiosity, learning effectiveness, and motivation, not just interactive DaVinci. So technically, then the greatest or the biggest finding here is that, we're not replacing current mechanisms of how people learn things. We are augmenting those mechanisms by adding new ways of engaging with the material. Similarly, there's issues of consent and privacy. There's authenticity is a concern. Overuse. Maybe this is just how people want to do things and learn things and not any other way. We don't want to be supplanting instructors. And then the question, of course, comes up about postmortem existence. Right? We're technically not cloning anybody. We have information about DaVinci from a very particular point in his life when the journals existed. We know nothing, at least the model at this point knows nothing about anything else outside of that time window. But postmortem existence is already something, right? There are tools out there that can create somebody who's already passed, a friend or family member, and you can still continue to chat with them. And then models can also promote harm. All right, so let me turn into the next area of autonomy and present some projects that empower self-directed achievement and independence. Also happy to answer any questions as we're going through. We don't have to wait till the end. All right, so in this work, we were, as it says, we're looking at facial expression recognition as input for people with quadriplegia. And we know that more than half the global population, is about 4 billion people, play video games. It could be on a mobile device, it could be on a console or anything else, but gaming is part of people's lives, and it's a bigger industry than movies, sports, music, everything combined. It's way bigger. But it isn't quite equally available to everybody, as we can imagine. So this is my student who graduated last fall. She's now a postdoc at CMU, but she has spinal muscular atrophy. So that means she doesn't have any voluntary control of any muscles in her body, except facial muscles and her right thumb. And so all her work, since she's the one who built the system and did the studies, this is part of her PhD work, all her coding happens like this. And she has limited range of motion in the right thumb, so on the trackpad. And so video games, of course, would be a great way for her to be able to build friendship and community outside of her school friends. But video games are not accessible. While every system out there has a lot of accessibility features, motor impairments or challenges have less accessibility than others, whether it be hearing or other kinds of issues. Right, so as I just said, growing interest in playing video games because games have been used for many other purposes, learning and therapy and entertainment and rehab and health, all sorts of things. And people with disabilities, and especially those that demand a lot of hand motor skills, using a controller or a keyboard requires a lot of coordination. They are left out of playing video games. So there are a lot of prior hardware designs and mechanisms to enable people to be able to play video games, right? BCIs are one popular, I wouldn't say popular, but one mechanism that exists. So that's brain-computer interfaces. The challenge, of course, being accuracy, slowness, and all of those things. And of course, you need to wear something on your head. Then there's voice recognition, which can work. Again, the problem is latency. A challenge is also recognition of different types of accents that people may have. And so problems that might lead to more frustration than enjoyment when using these systems. There's gaze tracking. Similarly, there's you have to wear hardware. Then there's a single switch. And a single switch can only do what a single switch can do, which means games need to be sort of custom designed. And there is no way for people to be able to play the games that everybody else in the world is playing. This one's pretty promising. Tongue computer interfaces, there's a couple of new startups in that space now. And from what I've tried, accuracy is pretty high and control is pretty fine-grained. And then you have a couple others. The actual consumer product is this one. I believe it's about $500. It is the only one that exists. It's sort of a mouth-based joystick. And it works. I mean, people use it. And my student also has one of these. It's just that she wasn't too interested in having something in her mouth for extended periods of time. It's exhausting in its own way. Right, so there were a lot of requirements for us to meet that we didn't want anything that's expensive. We didn't want to wear anything. We want something that was fast, and we wanted the games also to be the games that other folks or everyone is playing, not custom designed. And so we came up with this idea of using facial expressions as a form of input, since she did have some control over her facial muscles. In our system, we use both real-time video input as well as a little bit of speech input for other macro non-game related tasks like. And all of those both of those are processed, converted into a key mapping, and then we use them for games. And then these games we designed to look and feel and behave similarly to existing games like car racing and first-person shooter. The first one was just a walking adventure, was more for during a study for people to get used to the controls. For those less familiar with facial expression recognition, it's fundamentally the entire face or facial movement is sort of broken down into discernible action units, which is, I believe there's 44 of them at this point. And it's essentially a combination of muscles that lead to each movement. And so here, top and bottom, we see the cheek raiser at the top and the lip puller at the bottom. And together, the lip puller and the cheek raiser equal to a smile as an expression. And then that expression has an emotion that we ascribe to it, which is a positive emotion or happiness. right? So after we built our system, we wanted to do an evaluation. So we did a study with 12 volunteers who had muscular dystrophy or SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. This was done over Zoom because my student was performing the study. This was also maybe the tail end of COVID. And she herself, having SMA, has her own challenges of fatigue over time. So we broke the study down into 2 sessions. I think my entire research career as a student, as faculty, this has been the hardest study I've ever seen done. Because the participants had their own challenges, right? Trying to install software at the other end, they need their own helpers or caregivers to do it. Some couldn't to do the entire study with them lying down. There were people who had other additions, like there was another person who was deaf, so doing a Zoom conversation has its own challenges, and my student is typing like this, so it's just the time cost is very high. But regardless, she did this study and she did great. And right, so we wanted to do, we installed in the first session, then we rescheduled another session and actually did the study. We also built, before I go into the results, she also built a custom interface because the initial system was designed for her. And so certain expressions she could make, when we did pilots in the lab, turned out that others couldn't make. And so they were not even reliably recognized. And we built then a custom interface to be able to manipulate which expressions people wanted to make, and then which expressions get mapped to character movement, car control, and shooting and all that. And so we did a study looking at usability and functionality, and overall average ratings turned out to be pretty high. We looked at the learnability of the system, was super easy to learn, sensitivity and responsiveness was super high, and overall ease of use was fairly decent, and comfort was very high. And then we wanted to also look at, we designed the games, we designed to make them look like real world, actual commercial games. And how well did we do in terms of, what was the playing experience like? And so people were interested in the story, people didn't feel frustrated, people felt successful, they felt skillful, they were not bored, enjoyed it. This one is probably the lowest. I felt challenged, so maybe the games were actually too easy. The one thing that we didn't enable manipulation for everybody was the difficulty of the game. The difficulty was set for what was her difficulty level, that she wanted enemies appearing every so often and things like that. Right? But that is easy to tune. Qualitatively, people thought it was an easy to learn system, and they liked being able to play without using their hands. The fact that they could play without using their hands was positive thing. And so we did have a lot of folks interested whose kids are interested, or they want this system for their kids, and we sort of still need to put it online so people can just take it and run with it and manipulate it as they want to. So that's sort of our plan. Here's a quick video. How do we get audio?
I think the easiest if you play from on computer.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
That's the easiest.
You designed this game. It's pretty nice.
It was actually done by a high schooler. The other student in the video. He did it. Oh, just cut off. Okay. All right. Yeah, so as I said, it was designed by a high schooler because he wanted to learn Unreal and we needed a game design, so it kind of just worked out timing wise. And sometimes I do take high schoolers in my lab and they usually do pretty well.
What's the gameplay?
How long was the gameplay? It could go on as long as you didn't die. And I think when you die, then you respawned.
The questionnaire, how many times?
Oh, but for the study, they played the game. You know, I don't remember how long they played the game for, but there was some fixed time. So everybody had the same amount of exposure to them. Okay, so looking at sort of this last area or category in my work, I'm looking at how to empower individuals to adapt and flourish. Not every single project I am showing uses AI. Many of them do. Sometimes you just don't need it. All right, so in this work, we're looking at noisy galvanic vestibular stimulation, which is fundamentally putting electrodes on the back behind your ears on the mastoids and electrically stimulating your inner ear, which controls your balance and your sense of up and down and gravity and all those things. All right, so spatial memory is a fundamental aspect of our real world functioning. Spatial navigation necessitates, we need some kind of temporal integration, we need preservation, and we need evaluation of many, many different spatial cues to figure out where we are, how to get there, what did we last see, and things like that. And so there's a lot of prior work that has shown that galvanic vestibular stimulation can boost spatial cognition, but a lot of the work is with people who have vestibular disorders. Not so much that I found in people without vestibular disorders. And the second thing we noticed was that there's a lot of work that's been done with humans. I mean, the work with humans, not mice and others, is the work is done on a screen. So people sit down, there's a screen that you do navigation on. And even though navigation might happen in 3D like a video game on screen, it's kind of still not the same as navigating in the real world where it's sort of immersed and everything is sort of from a first person perspective. And so our hope was that by doing the work in virtual reality, we would be able to fill some of the gaps in prior work and still be able to come up with a study that might have some ecological validity. So this is sort of our experiment setup. We did an experiment with 32 participants. It was a VR environment, and there were 5, the figure shows 4, but there were 5 specific navigation objects that you had to find your way to. And you did it stage by stage. First one, the second one, the third one, and all that stuff. And so we had 2 groups. We had the, right here's that. We have the with GVS, with noisy GVS, and the without noisy GVS groups of people. And there was a 2-part process. The first is encoding of memory. So that everybody walked around the VR environment to see where the objects are. And then the objects were removed. They walked around the same environment again to tell us where the objects they thought they remembered seeing. And so that's sort of what we're comparing.
Why do you use the qualifier noisy? Is there such thing as non-noisy?
Yes, there is directional GVS also.
Okay.
So noisy keeps you upright, but in directional GVS, if I put current, let's say one direction to the other, you have body tilt. And that's when your head is looking up. But if your head is looking down and we put current, then you'll have body turn like that. So different effects happen depending on your orientation of the head relative to the grappling.
And what kind of noise did you use?
It is 0 mean square noise, right? So everything comes down to 0. We have to, the challenge with GVS is it needs to be calibrated for each individual. So there's, and the calibration process in our case was a little bit more subjective, but I think we can do a better job by using, putting on a VR headset and looking at IMU data to calibrate it. But essentially what happened was we put electrodes on people, and we start with a certain current level and we increment the current in small amounts, and then we observe their behavior, what happens. And then we also ask them at what point do they feel the tingling, right? So we're fundamentally using kind of like a 1 up, 2 down adaptive staircase test to actually figure out the threshold that they're telling us is the actual threshold. And that gives us the range for our noise. And then in between, we just have noise. Right, so this is a path length calculation. So the blue shows us the individuals who did not have GVS stimulation. That's our control group. And then the red or orange, what it looks like, shows us the people who did have GVS. And we can see significant differences in the walking path lengths in the virtual environment. This is a heat map of their path length. So at the top row, we see those people who had GVS stimulation or noisy GVS, and the paths are a little bit more direct, starting point to ending point. It's as if they kind of knew where they're going. And the paths without GVS condition are a little bit more meandering. So the paths are much longer for them to figure out where to go and what's going on. We looked at task completion time, and people without GVS took significantly longer than those with GVS. And we're looking at seconds, all the way the range being from 50 to little over 300 seconds. And this is total task time, not each individual object that they had to. Wait, what happened? Okay, so we had in the paper, there's a few other metrics. We looked at the comparison of people who are video gamers, if they did any better in this task, and we didn't see any significant difference. We didn't see any significant difference between genders. We did not see significant difference between people. We asked them to fill out the Santa Barbara Spatial Orientation Scale, or SBSOD. And those who filled that out said they are good at spatial navigation, didn't particularly do any better here than anybody else. Then we didn't see, nobody indicated really high motion sickness, but that's a little bit of a confound in the study because GVS can reduce motion sickness in VR. And so while we know that, at least from work that I've read, that the pathways of spatial memory versus motion sickness, the way GVS or vestibular stimulation impacts it are different in the brain, we can't say that there might not be any cross interactions, that maybe people did better because they didn't have motion sickness versus they did better because they had GVS. And for that, we need to do a different kind of study where we can completely separate out motion sickness as a parameter and then just have GVS as a separate parameter. All right, so this work, this is looking at how can we use AI to assist with facial paralysis therapy or rehab therapy that people can do at home, to sort of in between their appointments with their clinician. Facial paralysis is a consequence. It can happen to anybody, anytime, anywhere from age of 2 to 80 or more. You could just wake up one morning and you have it. And so it could happen for multiple reasons, even something as simple as a viral infection. And fundamentally leads to a drooping of one side of the face. And because of that, it leads to a lot of emotional distress. It leads to challenges in eating, talking, and in general, people's psychosocial well-being and quality of life. And the state-of-the-art therapy that we found is mirror therapy, where essentially you are standing in front of a mirror. I think you also have a mirror here, which, because people don't want to look at their face in the mirror either, this paralyzed side. So you place a mirror here, and then you perform a set of physical exercises or facial exercises to help you regain control over your paralyzed side of the face. And so doing that, people have no sense of whether they're doing it right, if they're making any progress, and what is going on, right? So what we want to do was help resolve some of these challenges. From a technical point of view, problem was that we didn't have any data sets or trained models out there. I mean, there still are no data sets. Only about maybe a month ago, we found the first data set that has actual data set of people with facial paralysis. I mean, tons of data sets of people's faces and facial expressions, but not necessarily people with facial paralysis. Right. The second challenge was that we wanted to detect muscles independently on half the face, this side and this side independently. And as I just showed, facial action units are calibrated for bilateral facial movement. So when you smile, it's activation of both these and both these muscles constitutes an activation unit, not independently. We wanted something that can provide real-time feedback, which means a model had to run fast. The inference had to be super fast. And we wanted it to run on a mobile device so we could actually do studies with people and they could use it. We didn't have to bring them into the lab to do it. And then, of course, it had to be super easy to use. Right, so our solution was to develop a new model, a really lightweight model that could estimate muscle intensities at a unilateral level. And that way we could also have some kind of metric, right? Comparing this side to this side, everybody could get a personalized metric of how it was doing. Not to say that people's facial movement is 100% symmetric, but we still could give them some ratio. And so our model eventually ended up being more than 99% smaller than another model at the time, which we were looking at, which was doing facial activation unit detection, but bilateral detection. So education of facial muscular anatomy is an important aspect of facial paralysis training, rehab, and recovery. And so this is an example of the facial muscle filter that we put on a person's face so they could start making a correspondence between this muscle and what they're actually doing in terms of activating it. So this is what it looked like on a phone, looking at the selfie camera. The facial muscle filter labels the muscles. So there's a cheek muscle, the dimpler, upper lip, corner, etc. The muscles are labeled right here. And then these muscles down here, we can show the activations on the left and the right side. And the colors of the activation show you which is optimally activated, overactivated, or underactivated, to give you a sense of what you need to do with which muscle. You want to bring it to green when doing the specific facial exercises. This is what it looks like on a phone. It worked on Android, Apple, both. And so it tells the person that they're exercising. There's the left side paralyzed, and here we're simulating it, but we actually did a study with real patients, and shows you the symmetry calculation between the left side and the right side, and then each muscle's activation and the intensity of that activation for the entire level. Then we did a study, our first study with 20 adults who had facial paralysis, and they performed 5 facial exercises 5 times each. And these exercises we looked up online to figure out what are the basic default exercises that people have to do. And all we asked for at the time, and again, this was, COVID era Zoom study, is what people thought about the app itself, what they thought was its functionality, its usability. Is that something they would want to use? Would it be helpful for them? And in general, we can sort of see all their ratings were pretty high. People said they'd want to use it daily. It was better than mirror therapy, and it found it motivating. They could use it anywhere and everywhere, and it's something that they wanted to. So this is now, we're working on the next version of this. We're also now collaborating with facial neurosurgeon from UC San Francisco. Now we have access to, or at least we can put it out, or at least getting it ready for a clinical trial with patients at that, at UCSF Medical.
It's nice to see the gamification technique applied. It's so useful, isn't it?
We tried, but we didn't really evaluate. And I think all the numbers are moving way too quickly for it to actually be meaningful. But now,
there's a score and the duration and things.
Yeah. But nobody really tested it for a long time. It was just the duration of the study. The new version that we're done building, one is it does, this one was doing 4 action units. Now we're doing 22. So it's a lot more comprehensive. We can use it also for diagnosis of specific other conditions like synkinesis which is a subcondition of facial paralysis. So when you move your mouth, your eye twitches, or you move your eye and mouth, there's a correlation between these two motions. Where we have a separate component of learning or education about facial muscular anatomy, and a separate area for therapy or facial paralysis rehab. And then we do a lot more diagnostics. Not diagnostics, we do a lot more data analysis. So we collect all this data, and then people can look at and track their progress over time for each specific muscle, for each exercise and whatnot. So a lot more granularity and all that stuff. And the hope is that we will then be able to connect it to the clinician's end. I mean, right now they'll just look at it, but we'll be able to connect it to whatever system they use. So then they have a sense of how things have happened in the last 3 weeks, so that the progress is not just discrete intervals of meeting with the clinician, but it's more a continuum of how things are going. Okay, so I'm gonna try to wrap this up. Right, is all these 3 areas of growth, autonomy, and relatedness, I believe, allow me at least to conceptualize a future of science of human AI interaction, where we can design systems that are actually more integrated with humans and those that can lead to augmenting our abilities. And I define the science of human AI interaction as the study of how humans and AI can work together as part of a cognitive and a sensory motor system. And so by integrating insights from a lot of different domains, it's got to be interdisciplinary, we can truly design systems that respond to our needs. To ground this science, I am drawing upon a few prior works, right? The theories like the media equation or distributed cognition theory and the second self. And second self is a work by Sherry Turkle, who is at MIT, and it highlights how digital tools sort of become extensions of our cognitive processes. And so fundamentally, Sherry Turkle's work shows that tools don't just support thought, they shape what we think. And fundamentally, tools shape the kinds of questions we ask, which then impacts the kinds of problems we solve. Right? And one example is, of course, tools impact us is the Google effect, where we have all, maybe most or many of us have shifted our focus to remembering where the information can be found as opposed to remembering the information itself. We know which website to go to find something. Or for that matter, GPS as we use on our phones, by outsourcing route planning to a device, we have stopped building mental maps of places, of our surroundings, and it's fundamentally rewiring our spatial reasoning. And so we are navigating less through an understanding of the environment and more through following instructions that are given to us. And those use different parts of our brain. All right, so tools are actually really changing us. The next is the media equation, where Nass and Reeves established that people treat media, right, in the 90s, and more recently AI systems as if they're real. So they treat them as social actors. We've seen a lot of this in VR also, where proxemics and other social behaviors apply, that people respond to and expect these entities to have behaviors that we expect of people. And then lastly, the distributed cognition theory, where Ed Hutchins' work provides a framework for understanding how our thinking is distributed, that it's not an isolated mental exercise, but it is part of it's distributed across our tools, our people, our environments. And so together, I believe these theories can highlight and indicate that AI can actually be more than a tool. It can be part of how we think, we act, and we relate. And so designing the interaction with AI is almost as critical as designing the intelligence itself. All right, so just to wrap it up, we live in a complex world that's full of objects and tools we use, places we go, and people we interact with. And every day we interact with this world through multiple modalities, like all of our senses. We have social interactions, we have emotions, there's movement, and all sorts of things. But our interactions with AI currently at the moment are limited to chat. Maybe talking, but it's one modality. And the separation, I believe, highlights a new opportunity, also a design challenge, that we need to develop interfaces that can integrate all of this intelligence support into the real world workflows, into our physical environments, where we can take advantage of this. And so we need more than, fundamentally, we need more than just text to engage with AI. Right, so we sort of want to be. I don't see it as becoming a full person, but I think we can expand the bandwidth of our interactions with AI tremendously. And so looking ahead, I should say not even looking ahead, this is some ongoing work in my lab. And if anyone's interested in talking more about any of this, happy to do that. We're looking at what happens when AI is visualized as a human in VR, and we just finished doing a study in that. We're looking at human agent interaction, right? What does that mean in terms of delegation versus agency? We're looking at the use of role of AI as a trainer or a coach, and how can that benefit or maybe detract from actual learning. And then human AI systems for rehab, as I mentioned, for facial paralysis, we're continuing that work. And then lastly, this idea of lifelong human AI interaction, which at the moment is a thought experiment more than a prototype, because I doubt if we can even build a prototype, right? We're gonna have to birth an AI at the time a baby is born and then watch it lifelong and design it and evolve it. But at least we can maybe virtually design it as an experiment. But this is super interesting to me personally. I'm a big science fiction fan. It comes a lot from science fiction. All right, so the work that I shared today, I believe is just the beginning. At the core of my work is this bigger goal, where not just to build more effective human AI systems, but in the words of Eileen, create space for humans to create, think, feel, and act, and explore, I should say. So I believe that true value of AI lies not in what it is, but what it enables us to be. I think I am going to stop here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Misha, for this presentation and for this inspiring outlook at the end. So we have time for questions. Yeah, maybe just pass the microphone.
So about the first study, I'm very interested in that we via AI agent, the learning efficiency goes up, and but I'm concerned about what if there's bugs happen in the video, for example, the face doesn't look so natural for a human sense. Does it matter, or is there any threshold that below that or above that, the human reaction is completely different? Is there any study about that?
I don't know of any study off the top of my head, but I won't be surprised if there's something out there, right? Like there's a lot of work on uncanny valley. And if something becomes so real, but not quite real enough, then it's kind of freaky. And so here, people knew they're engaging with an AI-generated video character, but they still behaved and responded to it as if it was someone teaching. And you can, if you look at the video playing at the top, you can see there's artifacts in the mouth movement, right? These are much better now, and just 3-4 years later. But at this point, at least video generation might be really good. Like we can't tell the difference, right? But fundamentally, it's kind of like in virtual reality, right? There's two kinds of illusions in VR. There's the place illusion and the plausibility illusion. The place illusion is fundamentally you put on a headset and you're like, oh, wow, I'm on the moon. And you feel like you're on the moon, even though you're standing here or in your living room. The plausibility illusion is the other side of it, that whatever's happening around me is really truly happening to me, right? That's what makes you believe that it's happening. And then the visual fidelity of it depends. I mean, you can watch 3D animation from Disney and still relate to the characters. They're not realistic looking, but they're very realistic behaving in terms of body motion, facial expression, all those things. Or you can relate to stick figures and watch an animation with stick figures and still be able to relate to it. So I would think that some of it would be individual preference. Like, there's a lot of people who play video games who want hyper realistic visuals. And some of it might be that it doesn't matter. People engage with character AI or any other types of AI character, they're talking to them. The realism comes from the conversation, not from what the character's avatar looks like. So I think there's a variation in that.
Another question is about what about different, for example, the the complexity of the context, is that has any effect to the experiment result? For example, we just use some very easy understanding story versus some difficult scientific papers. Does that affect the result?
I think we'll have to do a study to see that, but I would think, yes, it would have an impact. Because in this case, there was likely, like I said earlier, some impact of novelty effect. And this is something you've never seen. You're like, oh, it's this character teaching me about vaccines and blah, blah, blah. But it could work in your favor, right? That if the attention levels are high, then the character might have caused a high attention level, and that's fine because you're actually learning the content because you're paying more attention. But that could certainly happen.
We're running out of time, so last question.
Thank you. A completely different kind of question. Do you say please and thank you in your prompts to Gen AI?
I used to.
They used to. People used to recommend that. Sam Altman recently came out and said, makes that bloody difference. Would you like it to become a thing where people treat AI bots with respect in the same way they would expect a person to treat them? What's your take on the future ethics of that?
I would think, at least personally for me, it would depend on the context. If the more real the presence of an AI becomes, is in, if I'm wearing AR glasses and it's just sitting right here, it kind of looks not very different from everybody else in the room, then my expectations and my own behaviors towards it become that they would be towards another human being. But if it's just that I'm typing, at that point, I'm like, if I say please and thank you, it's more processing that it has to do for no real value. That I'm just wasting compute to make it process. And so, not really in that case.
Just one comment before I wrap it up, because it relates to these questions. I think one background question that would be very important to investigate is the difference between tool use and social interaction, right? And with these technologies, we're starting to blur the two. It's not as, using Google Maps to find your way around, because we can relate to them as a social other person. But for example, in this context, it activates all kind of pedagogical, context, and the way in which we relate with people is very different compared to how we relate with tools. And it might have very different consequences for what brain areas get activated, how it affects our memory, how it affects learning. We know that social cues, for example, attention and makes it easier to learn and memorize things and so on. So maybe also some of the dependency problems and so on that people notice with these systems could be mitigated by making them more social, so in the sense that I'm actually interacting with another person almost, rather than with a tool that I somehow kind of like incorporate as a resource into my own embodiment. I know it's a big topic, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about that during your stay. But I just want to say that's an interesting new frontier where now we can modulate the sociability of our tools and see what different effects that has.
Right, and I think we will see an effect if I were to say anything on that.
Right,
but I think yes, let's talk about it.
Okay, great.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everybody.